This is demand. No, it isn't. Sorry. This is slip thy little dewdrop into thy great lake, not to become lost, but to merge into oneness with thee. Teach me to be a dewdrop enchanted with divine love, slipping unaffected down the lotus leaf of seductive sense lures to thy glistening waters of wisdom. I am thy immortal dewdrop, sliding freely and not adhering to the leaves of past, present, and future lives. I smoothed the slopes of my mind with wise restraint, that the thirsty pores of temptation might absorb none of my strength. I am thy prodigal dewdrop, quivering in the hollows of life and death, waiting to slip down when it can to thy shoreless sea. Though long truant, I, thy tiny dewdrop, am homeward bound, however long the journey take. After this rhythmic dance of life, rising with birth and sinking with the downbeat of death, I will refresh myself at last in thy unmoving sea. I do not want to lose myself. Thy tiny dewdrop craves only, by merging in thee, to feel that I am one with all the other drops in thy ocean. I will be a rainbow-hued dewdrop, one with thy omnipresence, and yet in my omniscience, aware of my former dewdrop existence. I pray that all God-thirsty souls will come and drink from the great source of all our lives. And this is from Rays of the One Light, Parallel Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. And this week's reading is Why Do Devotees Fall? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. An endlessly fascinating question is, why did Judas fall after receiving the extraordinary blessing of being accepted into the inner circle of Jesus Christ's disciples? For Judas was one of the 12 apostles, meaning the 12 direct disciples of Jesus. Yet he betrayed Jesus and earned for himself the opprobrium of Christendom for all futurity for his sin. We find Judas reprimanding Jesus just days before that betrayal. Jesus, aware that his disciples would soon be facing, with his death, the supreme tragedy of their lives, allowed Mary to express her devotion by anointing his feet with costly ointment. This act of wanton waste, as Judas saw it, awakened indignation in that disciple. He said, Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? The Bible continues, This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and kept the purse, and bare what was put therein. Then said Jesus, Let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor ye have always with you, but me ye have not always. Doubt not the power of delusion. Respect it. Indeed, fear it, though not in the sense of cowering before it. For, as Yogananda said, one is not safe until he attains Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the state of final union with God. Judas, through attachment to money, opened his consciousness to subtle influences, which may be called satanic, that drew his thoughts toward other related attitudes, the importance of worldly power, for instance, and of worldly influence. The Bhagavad Gita gives a graphic explanation of how easily the mind can be drawn downward once it begins to feed on wrong attitudes. In the 2nd chapter, Sri Krishna states, If one ponders on sense objects, there springs up attraction to them. From attraction grows desire. Desire, impatient for fulfillment, flames to anger. From anger there arises infatuation, the delusion that one object alone is worth clinging to the exclusion of all others. From infatuation ensues forgetfulness of the higher self. From forgetfulness of the higher self follows degeneration of the discriminative faculty. And when discrimination is lost, there follows the annihilation of one's spiritual life. At the first thought of delusion, Paramhansa Yogananda said, that is the time to stop it. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. Good morning, everyone. We're going to have our Festival of Light soon, and so I wanted to just give a few thoughts on this topic before we continue on to that. It's funny, this question of how devotees fall, are different responses we can have to that. Some people hearing this or at some times in their lives will think, oh, how do devotees fall, or why? Please, no thanks. Can we just talk about how devotees rise? Well, that's next week's topic. And why have that reaction? I think it's partly, at least in myself, I wondered why anytime someone left the path, for example, who joined around the time that I did or before, I would always feel this great pain, even if I didn't know them that well. And of course one can understand feeling compassion or concern for someone who is leaving the path or leaving spirituality, because you know that they'll suffer. Not they'll suffer as punishment, they'll just suffer because they'll suffer. They'll lose sight of the truths that were helping them. But my reaction was more than that. And also, like I said, I couldn't say that my compassion was so deeply universal that I was feeling their pain as my own or anything. But rather, I think it was reminding me that I didn't want to leave the path. It may have even reminded me of the years of suffering before I came to the path. It might even be on a deeper than conscious level, a reminder of, or a memory, perhaps even of past lives when I left the path. I'm sure there are many past lives when I did. And I think it's a journey we all go through of coming closer and farther. As Swamiji said to Master, when Swamiji said, does it always take so long to find God? And Master said, how did it go? Well, essentially, Swamiji said, have I been your disciple for thousands of years? And Master said, it's been a long time, that's all I'll say. And Swamiji said, does it always take so long? And Master said, oh yes, desires for this thing and that thing take people away again and again. And so we come in for a time and then we get pulled away, and then in for a time and then pulled away until we are finally in, not for a time, but forever. And that is the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That's from that state we do not fall again. Not Sabhikalpa Samadhi, which you can fall from. Again, this is not our immediate concern, the difference between these two, but in fact the difference between them is attitude. Whether we see, I have merged with God, and instead of praying to God, you can as well just pray to me. That's wrong. Or I have merged with God, like that beautiful poem that we just read from Master, the dewdrop has merged into the great sea. As he said often, the ocean, the wave can not say, I am the whole ocean, but rather the ocean has become myself. The ocean has become this wave. And so we don't want to reverse the case. And this is what happens, whether it's somebody struggling between these two samadhis, again, not a common problem, or our daily lives, this attitude of, do I think about myself? My needs must come first after all, and so on. It's just the ego. It's very understandable in a situation like we're in right now to contract in upon oneself, to sort of, if we're facing a crisis in our family, obviously that is what requires our attention right now. There's no question about that. That is what Divine Mother has served us as an exam or as a way to help others, the immediate ones again in our home. That's obvious. But when things are settled down, or if they have been settled, it's easy to just sort of live in a little cocoon of one's own making and saying, well, I'm okay, you're okay, fine. And that's why it's been so helpful to have, for example, healing prayers for others, to be aware of our Guru Bhais, our fellow disciples and Kriya Bandhs, to know what's happening with them, to be able to pray for them, their families, their friends, and so on, who are going through a difficult time. And the other day a friend was remarking how helpful she was finding it to be able to think of others and to be able to pray for others and to feel, of course, the compassion that one does feel when other people are suffering and the ability to do something about it through prayer. Not all of us are physicians and nurses who can help everyone directly during this pandemic, but certainly we can pray, and prayer has a very real effect. But also, we can just imagine if the case were reversed, if we were struggling with a family member or ourselves, having a great difficulty and a health crisis, and nobody cared. You see? And so rather than imagining that or not wanting that, then we can say, well, I know now someone who is going through a difficult time. Let me pray for them. Let me help them if I can. It's not easy to help during lockdown and so on, but we do what we can, at the very least through prayer, and maybe there's some other kind of help we can give as well. So this expansive attitude, expanding beyond myself, is a perfect antidote for contracting, for falling in upon the ego, and again, for forgetting the higher self. And so it's very easy to tell when we're going wrong, going in the wrong direction, because the heart feels pinched. And we can say, my heart doesn't feel pinched, I am seeing things clearly, finally. You see, but listen to the voice. The voice gets a thin quality or a tense quality. It can even be that what we're saying is completely correct, factually. But if we're saying it the wrong way, or at the wrong time, or with the wrong attitude, then it's wrong. It's sort of like multiplying by -1. A positive thing becomes negative. So if we have a wrong attitude, it doesn't help. That's what has to get sorted out first. So whenever we do feel that, we have lots of remedies. Take a moment, meditate. Take a time away from others. Sometimes we are pulled down by the energy of others. Sometimes we are just not, it's not necessarily other people's negativity, though that's very common, but it's just, overstimulation. My nerves are burned out, or I'm too tired. A lot of arguments in the home are basically, when you analyze them, I'm tired, you're tired. That's it. Why don't you do it? Why don't you do it? Do you know what kind of day I have? Do you know what kind of week I had? Yes, I have, because you've spent all week right here with me. And so to just take time out, take space to sort of heal your nerves, take time in quiet and silence, take the time you need, because we're no good to anyone when we're fried. And it's better to take care of the nerves and heal them. Then we can be in a better position to give. We can't draw on an empty balance or a bank balance. We can't give out of a bucket of our heart that's empty. And God isn't expecting us to. So let's take a moment to fill that up. But the other thing too, in addition to taking space, silence, meditation, chanting is very helpful for opening the heart again, reopening the heart. Also, spending time in satsang with other devotees is very helpful because that positive company reinforces our own positivity. A great protection against falling on the spiritual path is to spend time with other devotees, other fellow disciples of your guru, if you have one, of course, as most of you all do watching this. The feeling of reinforcement is very much needed. In fact, Master said that one's spiritual progress is determined primarily by the company one keeps. I mean, we might think, no, it's my strength of my meditation or my lack of strength of meditation. No, my strength of meditation, let me get back into it. Going deeper if we've been pulled away, recently, understandably, if there's been a crisis in our own lives. It's determined by my attitude. It's determined even by my guru's help. All of these things are true, but Master nevertheless said, he made other statements too. This isn't the only word he gave, but at this time he did give this word, determined primarily by the company one keeps. In fact, the conversation continued. One disciple said to him, "Well, sir, but then what happens if I'm alone? What happens if I'm meditating by myself? I don't have any company to keep." And Master said sweetly, "Am I not always with you?" Sweetly in the sense of also very dear. Of course I'm with you. And that's also what he meant, that if we're on our own, thinking I have to do it by myself, well, where's my guru? He's right here. And so why not ask him? Take your complaints to him. If you feel frustrated about the unreasonableness of life, which Master called, he said, let's find God now and not after many irksome incarnations, many more irksome human incarnations. Life really is irksome, irritating, annoying. It really is. Sometimes tragically so. Sometimes just like a pebble in the chapels, that just always is irritating us. So it's as Swamiji asked Master once when they were preparing the lake shrine. It's a beautiful place to open for the public right after the property was given to Master. He said there were all these bugs that were irritating them as they were trying to clean it up. And Swamiji said, "Master, in such a beautiful place, why are these bugs here irritating us? And why do they have to be here?" And Master said, it's God's way of drawing us back to Him. And as we have often said here during this time and at other times, this is a reminder that this world is not our home. And nothing could be clearer than that right now, when the world is seeming to treat us very unfairly. Delusion is treating us very unfairly. It certainly doesn't feel like home. And if it's home, what happens if we have to leave it or somebody leaves it? No, this is not home. And in fact, where people go when they leave here to the astral world is sort of home. Not really, though, because really our home is in God. Again, as that poem from Whispers from Eternity was telling us, that's where we're all yearning to go back to. So, one of the key factors for not falling, and therefore something to watch out for, is unfortunately also one of the most subtle. We can call it attitude, and that helps a lot in terms of clarifying it. But really it's attunement. How we stay in tune. Not to think of this as a scary topic, or even worse, as a topic for judgment, like that is in tune, that is not in tune, you are not in tune. No, not that way. But attunement really is key. So much so that Master said, I'm not sure of the exact quote, but essentially something like this, where he said to some of the disciples, "Many of you will fall, but it need not be if you stay in tune." Just that simple. That you won't fall if you stay in tune. So what is this attunement? How do we practice it, and how do we, fall in and out of it? Well, attunement, which is a word more or less, I think, Master coined, is, you can think of an image of tuning a radio, for example. In the old days when we had these analog knobs that you adjust and try to find the right station. It reminds me of, I said to Rajesh once, it's like playing a record in a record player. And then I said, "You do know what a record in a record player is, right?" He said, "I've seen pictures." So one starts to feel one's age. So similarly, these ancient radios, but hopefully you have seen pictures, or you can, otherwise you can Google it. But we adjust the knobs to get the exact station, and then we hear it clearly. So we adjust the knob of our mind to tune in to Master's frequency, so we can get hear him clearly. Also, you can think of attunement as tuning an instrument. And when we tune an instrument, we want it to, you don't just sit and tune it by itself and say, "Well, that sounds good." You always tune it in reference to some other instrument, or if you have a digital tuner or another way of tuning it, that it matches what is the correct note for that string on a guitar, that string on a violin, for example. And so in an orchestra or a small group of musicians, one person plays a note, whether it's the first violin in the orchestra or the flute player, playing a note, and then everyone matches their instrument to that, so that when they play together, it will sound correct. It will sound beautiful also. And so in the same way, we tune our instrument while listening to the Guru. And so you can say he plays his violin and we play our violin too. And so, but we do it in reference to him. So even if we're making adjustments, we're doing so while listening. So that's another, again, tuning the radio. You can't tune the radio when it's off, and you can't tune it with the volume turned down. You have to be able to hear. Is it coming in clearly? Am I tuning my instrument? Is it matching what he's saying? So this is sort of the abstract image of attunement. But really, it comes down to keeping ourselves open to Master, and as his disciple Sister Gyanamata said, and practicing it when we don't feel like it. You see, it's easy to practice right attitude when we feel like it. Sure, but the real challenge and the real growth comes when we don't feel like it. And how do we do that? Because, of course, when we don't want to, we can't say, "Well, want to." That's the whole problem. If we don't want to, and then we are able to say, "Well, I want to," then we didn't really not want to in the first place. It wasn't a hard test. Those hard tests come when we can't sort of get our head screwed on straight. It's cockeyed. We don't know why. Everyone else might be able to see. "I can tell you what your problem is if you would listen." "No, that's all right. I think I'm fine." But when we, what do we do when we're off and we don't know it, that's pretty hard, or we do know it and we don't know what to do about it? Again, pray, chant, meditate, listen to Swamiji, listen to Master, spend time with other devotees. All the same things are there, but when we're tested, those are the things we may not reach for. That's part of the test. That's part of the whole problem. And so one easy way to sort of prepare for such a exam is to spend time with devotees, listen to Swamiji and Master when it's easy. In other words, even to make a habit of it. It's not habit that will save us. But if we get into that pattern of always reaching out, then when we stop reaching out, we'll notice, this is different than how I normally am. Or we may even reach out unconsciously because we have this habit of doing so. Or they may reach out strongly enough to us. I can think of a few examples in my life when this happened. One was this is a story from when Dharmini and I were living in Los Angeles. Swamiji was giving a large public talk there, and then afterwards he had the suggestion, why don't we have a question and answer session a few days later. And he said our center might be too small to accommodate everyone. Why don't we rent a hotel room? Ballroom, conference room. And so we figured, well, let's pick a hotel close to where Swamiji is staying so he'll have an easy journey. It won't be too hard on him physically. And so I called the hotel and I had worked it all out and I had the reservation. And then I called to work out some of the details further, including the payment. And the woman I had spoken to originally apparently was unwell, so they said, well, can you just call back when she's better? And this continued on for days, and I finally said, is she the only person who can take reservations for, these kinds of rooms? I mean, isn't there anyone else? And they said, no, she's the only one. So, okay, strange. And then Swamiji suggested, why don't we have it at the Biltmore Hotel. Of course, the Biltmore in Los Angeles is where Master had his Mahasamadhi. The picture you can't see, the picture that's down here behind me is the last smile, we call it, and that's taken in the Biltmore Hotel. And so, very sacred ground for us, but I was then faced with a dilemma because I had already not only reserved the hotel, but I had announced everywhere that this is we had printed up 1,000 programs, the address of the hotel, come on Tuesday for the questions and answers, and so on. And this was just, a few days before the event. And so I said, oh, Swamiji, so sorry, but we sort of have this other plan in place. Now, Swamiji was asking for something. I was saying no. Everything in my background, my history was telling me this is wrong. You don't want Swamiji on one side and you are on the other side, the opposite side. You want it when you are on one side of the fence, you want to see he's on the same side of the fence as you. It reminds me of a funny line that somebody said, that line, that invisible line that you're never supposed to cross? And the other person said, am I getting close? The other guy said, look behind you. So anyway, I knew something was wrong, and yet my logic, my mind, everything said, we've already done all this other thing. It's already all set. In retrospect, it seems ridiculous, but that's the point. In the moment, one can be blind. Or at least I was blind. I think probably anybody else would have been smart enough to just say, of course, let's just go with your plan, Swamiji. It'll work out. But that's the problem. When we don't see that, when there's something confusing us, and you can't help it. There's no way around that. There will be a test that covers the eyes. That's part of the test. So we can't say never be blind. It happens. And it happened to me for sure. So it didn't feel good to say no, obviously. I mean, it should have felt like a heart attack. Instead, I felt a mild twinge. But I then asked a friend of mine, well, listen, why don't you call the Biltmore Hotel and just ask in case anything is open. Not because I was open-minded and thinking, well, and if it is, then we'll know. I was thinking, well, probably it isn't available, and then we can have proof, impersonal proof that, well, it's not available. We tried, but it's not available, so let's go with this plan. I had written something like this to Swamiji, and he said, well, maybe next time. Very sweetly. He said, I took it as saying it sweetly because it was an email. He didn't say sweetly in parentheses. But so my friend couldn't get through to the Biltmore Hotel. Same kind of thing. She was trying to reach someone. They said, that person's in a meeting. So she called back, sorry, they're still in a meeting. And she said, is this woman the only one who can take reservations for rooms? They said, yes, for ballrooms. She's the only one. So strange. So I, meanwhile, was trying to call my hotel. She was calling the Biltmore, and this was going on for at least a day and a half, maybe 2 days, maybe a little longer, just trying, getting up to the event, trying to, what is going on here? I think it was a karmic thing for me, and my fate was hanging in the balance in a way I didn't understand even. And so finally, I got through, my friend got through and said, no, I got through first to my hotel. And I talked to someone and knew, and she said, you don't have a reservation for a ballroom. I said, no, I do. If you check, it was with so-and-so, and it's in the atrium. She said, no, it's not in the atrium. I said, I know there are 2 rooms called the atrium. It's actually the first floor atrium, not the ground floor atrium. I'd been through this whole thing. She said, no, neither atria is yours. She said, I know because I have reserved a program for the first month, for both this one and the other one is reserved. They've been reserved for 6 months. So there's no chance you ever had a reservation for it. And so that was very confusing to me. And so finally, the first straight answer I'd had after weeks, right before the event. And then my friend said, I just got through to the Biltmore and there is 1 room available. We can have it. And so on, and all the terms and details if we act now. And so we did. And in fact, some of you have seen that. That's the video of the questions and answers session with Swamiji in Los Angeles. And I was really amazed because this could have been resolved right away, instantly. I could have been cooperative instantly, but I really felt that God saved me from myself. Swamiji may have saved me from myself. Maybe Master did. I don't know. I did not save myself, but I was saved nevertheless. And I can only just thank them. There was through no credit to me. But it was an example, I felt, of, trying to do the right thing whenever we're aware of it, and then sometimes we are pushed in the right direction or forced in the right direction, maybe out of sheer momentum. And what was very touching afterward, everything went smoothly from then on. We had a beautiful experience there before, during, after, and so on. And then, as it turned out, this was June of 2012, that was Swamiji's last time in Los Angeles, his last time in America. He didn't leave America immediately after that, but a few months later. And he left the body the next year. And so his last moment in Los Angeles was actually just like Master's, that it was spent in the Biltmore Hotel. And that room that Master was in is now the lobby of the hotel, and so, which is beautiful because it means anybody can walk in off the street and enter it and go right up to where this photo of Master is taken, and people will put flowers there and so on to devotionally mark the spot. And we took a photo of Swamiji right in front of it's a fountain actually, and we took a photo of Swamiji right there. That was the last photo taken of him in Los Angeles. Also, again, interesting parallel with Master. In fact, Swamiji entered the lobby and went over to, when arriving in the hotel, went over to a person there. And by now, after all these years, the Biltmore has figured out that part of their history, being a historical landmark, is also that Paramahansa Yogananda left his body here. In the early years, people would not know what we were doing. One security guard came up to me after I was standing with others and meditating by the fountain and putting flowers there, and he said, can you tell me what's going on? And I said, we our guru Paramahansa Yogananda in 1952 left his body right here, and so we're all, he said, okay, yeah, I knew it had to be something. I knew it just wasn't because it was a pretty fountain. I knew it was something. And now they have a whole book. The concierge at the hotel, oh, yes, are you here for Yogananda? And they show pictures and newspaper clippings and all these things that they have. I think a devotee probably prepared it for them. But Swamiji went over to her. He greeted her. She showed, oh, you're here. Here's the book. And he said, I was there that night. And she said, wow. She said, I've been working here for some years and no one has ever said that. That's amazing. And so it was touching that he could have that interaction and whatever else that could be there. And again, there was no next time. This was it. So I really felt saved from myself. And so we have to remember that God will save us and He can save us. But let's also listen to Him when He's trying to save us. I only barely listened, like I said. Let's call the Biltmore just to prove that it can't happen. Not very impressive. But still, this idea of if we practice when it's easy, then when we are blind and confused, maybe something will take us forward anyway. That's what we can hope. When I was working with school children as part of the Ananda Palo Alto School, and they were preparing for the play that we would do every year on the life of a saint, whether it's Krishna was one year, Jesus was another year, Yogananda was one year, and Buddha and so on. The teachers there had a motto for the students: the way I rehearse is the way I perform. And so, because during rehearsal, it's not real and I don't feel like it. You can act however you want. When the show comes, then I will be brilliant. And they would say, no, the way I rehearse is the way I perform. And so it was an easy way also to help the students. Let's get serious, because if you're always saying, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it, it doesn't work at all. But it was easy to say also, who is going to be on stage? You are. Who's going to say the line? You are. And nobody else. So it had very immediate consequences. Don't you want it to go well for you that night? Okay, so let's rehearse. So the way I rehearse is the way I perform applies very much, of course, to the spiritual life. When we rehearse for these pop quizzes, these sudden exams where we don't have any warning, and we might not even have any clarity. If we have spent the time rehearsing, it helps. That's what Swamiji said too. He said of many of his fellow disciples, direct disciples of Master, who left, he said they would fall out of tune. They would turn against Master, or they would turn against the spiritual path, and they would be attracted by something and they would leave. And he said sometimes it came during dry periods. Again, as Sister Gyanamata said, practicing when we don't feel like it or when we're getting nothing out of it. These periods come to everyone. We all have these periods. They're karmic. Who knows what it is, but they always happen. He said, it need not have happened. He said, a pattern of regular meditation and devotion and mixing with others would be the surest protection when we need it. And that's the point, when we need it. And we don't know when we're going to need it. We can say, I need it all the time, and that's true, but it's just when that thought comes in, maybe I don't need it, then that's the time to worry. And we may not worry. As I said, I vaguely was worried about this situation, but not as desperately worried and panicked as I should have been. Why am I saying no? Another situation like that, once Swamiji scolded me for something that I felt was unfair, and it wasn't unfair. And as Dharmini pointed out to me at the time even, that even if Swamiji's facts are wrong, Swamiji is right. And I agreed with that in principle. I was having a hard time applying it particularly, but I knew she was right. But of course, I was hurt. I was stung because these things that were being said, I felt were not fair. But guess what? That's how the ego feels. I did also know, I didn't think Swamiji was wrong. I wasn't thinking that, but I still felt hurt. And as he was getting into this scolding, I felt my heart start to close up. And I thought, oh, I work so hard all the time trying to open my heart to him, and listening to his recordings, reading his books, and so on. Whenever I can spend time with him, in a group, I'm always trying to be open because it feels so good when I am open. And now he's scolding me, and I don't want to feel open. I want to close. I want to protect myself. But it's the opposite of what I do. And so I sort of had this thought, is it right to close yourself now when, of course, he's taking the pains and the trouble to actually try to correct something that needs correcting in me? But again, when the ego is stung, it doesn't always have a fair-minded approach or even a halfway smart approach. But anyway, as my heart started to close, I sort of heard in my mind, no one loves you more than he does. And I thought, that's completely true. I don't know where the thought came from. I do know that I had always had this pattern of trying to be open, and so when I was closing up, I could feel, right in front of him, I'm closing up. This can't be right. So again, if we have that pattern, I was saved again, almost against my will in that moment. Please don't misunderstand. I'm not claiming any credit for anything, except that the way I rehearse is the way I perform. And so I then, didn't close my heart. I was still frustrated, and I expressed it a little bit to him, and he indulged me in that and was patient, even though I was. It's embarrassing now to think about it, but and then I wrote down everything he said. Because I thought, well, whenever he says something nice to me or to others, I write it down. And now he's taking the trouble to tell me some things that I don't find nice, but I won't write these down. How can that be true? It doesn't make any sense. You see, again, the sort of pattern was in place. So I wrote it all down, and I refer to that. Even now, it's very helpful. And I'm very glad he did that. But I wasn't glad at the time. It reminds me of someone, he said, he had asked him for advice. She said, I would really like you to give me some advice. And Swamiji knew that she had a particular ego problem that was obvious, and he didn't want to address it because he didn't feel she was ready. And she said, no, I mean it. I really want you to tell me something for my benefit. And he said, look, I just would rather not. You're doing fine. She said, no, I really want to know. And so he said, okay, well, one thing that you might consider is this. And he said, just backed up, and he said, well, I hope you're not offended. No, not offended, just disappointed. And then he said, and then she basically left him. He didn't see her again, and she was living in Europe. He was living in America. Swamiji would travel to Europe regularly, but she didn't see him for 10 years. For 2 years. And then, but 2 years later, when she did finally come back to see him when he was visiting there, she said, what you told me was exactly the thing I needed to hear. And she became, much more dedicated than she ever had been before. She even told him, I'm writing you into my will, and whatever I, have left over when I die, I want to go to Ananda, and so on. It was really quite sweet. So good for her that she could, if we're not open immediately, let us be open later. That's another solution. When we feel about something, say, well, let me put it on a shelf. If it's coming from the guru, I won't accept it because it hurts. I can't pretend it doesn't, but I won't reject it either. I'll just leave it there on a shelf. And then I'll decide maybe later to take it down and re-examine it when I'm calmer, when the tears have been wiped away, when there's been enough Mysore pak eaten to comfort, or whatever it is. When I'm feeling a little better, and maybe in the morning, I'll take another look at it, and maybe we'll see it more clearly. So keep some of these things in mind. Again, practice when it's easy. That's what Swamiji was saying in the New Path. When we have this regular habit of checking in, of reaching out for the spiritual oxygen mask and taking a deep breath, then when we need it, hopefully it will be there, or even without us meaning to. What is my hand doing? Oh, it's reaching out for help. because this is one of those very important points to keep me on the path. If we leave the path, we come back. It's just that there's a lot of time and suffering in between, and who wants to waste that time? Let's be with God now. So, as I said, now we'll have the Festival of Light.